The transport shuttle cut through the dense clouds of Vernar 4 like a blade through liquid smoke, leaving behind a faint orange trail before vanishing into the choking atmosphere. The cadets of the Galactic Academy had expected another harsh training ground, rocky plains, icy ridges, or irradiated deserts, but nothing in their manuals prepared them for this place. Vernar 4 was alive, or rather it felt alive, a world of endless bogs, dripping vines, and an air so thick that even breathing felt like swallowing soup. The moment the shuttle's rear hatch opened, steam flooded the compartment, burning cold instead of hot, and the cadets staggered out, slipping on the soggy ground that swallowed their boots. The mud clung like glue, dark green and pulsing with moisture. Liam Cross stepped onto the surface last, his visor fogging up immediately. He wiped it with his sleeve and squinted through the mist. The world stretched endlessly in shades of green and gray, with strange twisted trees rising like drowned giants from black pools. The air buzzed with unseen life, distant croaks, sloshes, and rhythmic thuds beneath the surface. He had been to rough terrains before during training, but never to a place that seemed to hate light itself. The humidity was suffocating, and the air smelled of wet stone and decay. The instructor's voice crackled through the comms. "Cadets, welcome to Vernar 4, your survival exam site. You will spend 6 standard nights here. Your task, maintain warmth and sustenance without off-world supplies. Remember, this planet's atmosphere reacts poorly to synthetic combustion. Conventional fire won't last. Adapt, survive, end transmission." And just like that, the shuttle lifted off, the roar of its engines echoing briefly before dissolving into the muffled silence of the swamp. Liam watched as the others immediately began unpacking their gear. Every species moved differently, some with grace, others clumsy in the muck. The reptilian Grath cadets fanned out to gather kindling, their scaled hands clutching metallic rods that sparked faint blue arcs. The Avixian twins, bird-like and irritable, tried to erect small windshields for their plasma heaters. The amphibious Olorans simply sank waist-deep into the water, assuming it would provide insulation. Each species acted according to instinct, and each one was about to fail. The first night fell faster than expected. The fog thickened until visibility dropped to a few meters. Every spark the cadets tried to make fizzled out with a pitiful hiss. Even the high-output plasma igniters couldn't sustain a glow longer than a few seconds before sputtering into silence. The moisture in the air was too dense. It absorbed the heat as if the planet drank it greedily. The oxygen balance was skewed. Too much vapor, not enough dry air to feed the flame. The darkness became absolute, the kind that swallowed light whole and made time stretch endlessly. Liam sat under the collapsed frame of his tent, feeling the chill crawl through his boots and up his legs. Around him, the alien cadets cursed, shivered, and bickered in frustration. He had seen this before, not the swamp, but the chaos that came when comfort was stripped away. The Academy taught strategy, discipline, and adaptability, but only humans seemed to truly grasp desperation. He remembered the stories his grandfather used to tell about nights on Earth when storms would cut power for days, and how people learned to live by heat trapped in Earth, not by flame. Those stories weren't lessons in science, but in patience. As the others scrambled to light dying torches, Liam began to watch the ground. He noticed something the others missed: steam rising faintly from patches of mud, not from the air itself. It came from below, like the planet was exhaling. He crouched, dipped his fingers into the soft soil, and felt warmth beneath the surface. It wasn't much, just a faint trace, but enough to spark an idea. The heat was trapped down there, insulated by layers of wet clay and decomposing vegetation. If the planet devoured fire from above, maybe it could protect it from below. He took his small survival spade, a tool no one else had bothered to pack because it seemed primitive, and started to dig. The mud resisted, heavy and stubborn, but he worked slowly, carving out a hollow about a meter deep. Every scoop released a puff of swamp gas that hissed like a whisper. He ignored the stench. His plan wasn't to fight the planet, but to use its nature against itself. He widened the pit, pressed the sides with his boots, and began lining it with clay. The others occasionally threw glances in his direction, but quickly turned away, assuming he was losing his mind. To them, digging a hole instead of fixing a heater was a waste of strength. By the time the second night fell, the camp was in disarray. The cadets had built makeshift shelters from tarp and branches, but the dampness seeped into everything. Equipment corroded, energy cells short-circuited, and sleep became impossible. The cold of Vernar 4 was deceptive. It didn't freeze skin, but instead crept deep into bones, numbing thought and will. Liam kept working quietly, collecting the driest materials he could find, fibrous bark from the few standing trees, and moss thick enough to squeeze water from. He built a small mound beside his pit and placed stones he had found along the marsh edge, smooth and mineral-heavy. He sparked his ignition tool, once, twice, 3 times. Nothing. The air swallowed it like a predator. He didn't curse. He simply adjusted his method. He dug a side tunnel into the pit, a narrow vent for airflow, and shielded it with wet clay. Then he covered the opening with leaves and mud, trapping the gases below. When he lit the next spark, it burned faintly before vanishing. But this time, he heard something different. A pop, then a low hiss from beneath the soil. The flame hadn't died. It had sunk. That was enough. As the rest of the cadets huddled in misery, Liam fed the underground flame through the vent with bits of dry bark. He could feel the warmth spreading through the clay. The pit glowed faintly, the heat staying trapped and stable. He sat beside it, closing his eyes for the first time in 2 nights, and exhaled a slow breath. The earth radiated warmth through the soles of his boots and up his legs, wrapping him in invisible fire. It wasn't bright, it wasn't loud, but it lived, steady and silent beneath the ground. All through the night, the rain fell in sheets, hissing against the swamp pools. The aliens' shelters sagged and collapsed under the weight of water. The reptilian cadets muttered in defeat. The Evixians curled their wings tight, and even the amphibious ones trembled from exhaustion. But in the small circle where Liam had dug his pit, the air shimmered faintly with rising steam. He lay on his back, staring at the fogged sky, and let his mind drift to the stories of old Earth tribes cooking through storms in pits lined with hot stones. He had thought those tales were romantic nonsense. Now, in the heart of this wet planet that devoured every spark, he understood their wisdom. Fire didn't have to rage. It could breathe quietly, hidden from the wind. When dawn came, the swamp looked the same, gray, endless, indifferent. But one small patch of ground was dry and faintly warm. The cadets crawled from their tents, their eyes hollow from sleeplessness, their scales and fur coated with slime. They were greeted by the sight of Liam sitting beside a steaming mound of soil, calm and alert, eating a ration bar he had warmed against the pit. For a moment, no one spoke. The realization settled slowly. Someone had managed to keep fire alive through the night, not by defying the planet, but by understanding it. Liam said nothing. He didn't explain, didn't boast. He just pressed another handful of moss into the vent, adjusting it like a man tending a sleeping beast. The others whispered among themselves, half curious, half skeptical. But when the sun climbed higher and the morning mist thinned, the only warmth left on Vernar 4 came from the ground beneath Liam's feet. And though none admitted it out loud, each cadet understood something profound had shifted that night. The human hadn't just survived. He had found a way to make the planet breathe with him. By the next morning, Vernar 4's mist thinned enough to reveal what the cadets' camp had become, a battlefield of exhaustion. The tarps sagged under the weight of water. The once gleaming survival gear was half submerged in mud, and the cadets themselves looked defeated. The reptilian Grath leader, Vokar, stood knee-deep in the bog, shaking the last spark from a broken igniter. The Evixian twins refused to leave their tent, wings drooping and soaked, while the amphibious Olorans sat in silence, their translucent skin dim and pallid. No one spoke to Liam, though more than one eye turned toward the small mound of soil that still gave off faint warmth. He could feel their curiosity mixed with pride and disbelief. It didn't matter. He hadn't built it for them. He had built it because cold kills slower than hunger, but it kills deeper. Liam chewed a piece of stale ration bread, his mind working faster than his hands. What he had made wasn't a fire in the traditional sense. It was a living organism now, a quiet engine that needed to breathe, to be fed properly, and to stay shielded from the swamp's thirst. The concept reminded him of an earth oven, something primitive, yet ingenious. The thought nagged him. If the planet's upper layer consumed fire, then fire had to live beneath it, safe from the damp. He wanted to see how deep the heat went. When he dug into the pit again, the clay walls were hot to the touch. The stones inside still glowed faintly from the night before, their color now the dull red of coals rather than the wild orange of flame. He crouched over the pit, observing how the air moved through the side vent he had carved. Warm steam drifted out lazily, a sign of proper airflow. He smirked. It wasn't technology. It wasn't a plasma heater or a thermal rod. It was balance, something the aliens rarely thought about. For them, survival was a battle against nature. For him, it was cooperation with it. He gathered more materials, moving slowly through the bog. The swamp was deceptive. Soft ground gave way without warning, and his boots sank deep enough to fill with icy sludge. He moved carefully, testing each step with his spade. He found strange fibrous roots running through the soil, thick as ropes, pulsing faintly with moisture. They smelled faintly of sulfur and iron, minerals that might sustain heat. He sliced a few and carried them back. He crushed the fibers into strands, weaving them loosely with dried bark to make crude kindling ropes. When he placed one into the pit, the smell of burning minerals filled the air, harsh but promising. The roots didn't burn with flame. They glowed, producing steady heat like coals. He realized Vernar 4 didn't need open fire at all. Its own flora provided an alternative, a natural slow fuel that could maintain warmth underground. By midday, the rain returned, soft and steady this time. Liam built a second pit beside the first, shallower but wider. He wanted to experiment with layering, using the glowing roots at the base, then stones, then clay, and finally a layer of soaked moss. The goal wasn't to make light, but to store warmth for longer. The mud thickened around him, but he ignored the discomfort. Sweat and rain blended on his face as he shaped the pit with precision, compressing the sides until they became smooth and firm. He thought of his grandfather's words again. "The fire doesn't live in the flames, boy. It lives in what you leave behind." That phrase stayed with him. Some cadets finally approached. Vokar was the first. His scales dulled to a grayish green. He stood over the human's shoulder, his eyes narrowing. "What are you doing, human?" he hissed. His tone carried irritation, but also curiosity. Liam didn't look up. "Digging," he replied. Vokar's tongue flicked in disdain. "Digging won't feed us." Liam pressed another layer of moss into the pit and said, "Neither will freezing." Vokar sneered and walked away, but Liam noticed him glancing back more than once. As daylight waned, the swamp grew darker again. The cadets had given up on their technology and gathered into clusters, conserving energy. Liam's pit now gave off a steady pulse of warmth. He crouched beside it, sliding a small metal container wrapped in wet leaves into the vent shaft. Inside it was a handful of tubers he had found near the marsh edge, bitter-smelling things that might be edible if cooked. He sealed the vent, waited, and listened. The sound of bubbling water came faintly from beneath the soil. The air smelled of earth and faint sweetness. When he finally pulled the container out, the tubers were soft, steaming, and surprisingly fragrant. He took a cautious bite. The taste was smoky, mild, but safe. It was the first real food he had eaten in 2 days. When the smell spread, the others noticed. Hunger overpowered pride. One of the Avixian twins, the smaller one with copper feathers, crept toward him and tilted her head. "How did you do that?" she asked. Liam held up one of the glowing roots. "The planet gives heat if you take it slow." She blinked, not understanding, so he added, "Fire dies in the air here, but the ground traps it. You have to feed it from below." Her feathers ruffled in disbelief. "That's primitive." He smiled faintly. "Primitive works." She returned to her group, whispering something to her brother. Soon others began watching from a distance, pretending not to care while sneaking glances at the warm steam rising from his pits. No one dared approach further, though Liam could feel their tension softening, the invisible shift that happens when fear meets hope. That night, he refined his system. He dug a small trench connecting the two pits, creating a channel that shared heat between them. He buried smooth stones inside, ones he had found beneath the surface earlier, noticing how they absorbed and retained warmth longer than expected. The swamp, for all its cruelty, offered everything he needed: insulation, fuel, clay, and stone. All he had to do was understand how to use it. Hours passed, and the camp sank into silence again. The rain's rhythm became a constant heartbeat across the wet canopy. Liam sat alone, sharpening a stick into a vent rod, when he noticed movement at the edge of his vision. Vokar had returned, crouching awkwardly beside him. His voice was low this time. "Your pit still burns." Liam nodded. "It doesn't burn, it breathes." The reptilian cadet tilted his head. "Teach me." Liam didn't answer right away. He studied the alien's face. Proud but tired, strong but humbled by nature, he recognized the look. Survival had no rank, no race. It was the one thing that made everyone equal. "Bring me clay," he said finally. Vokar obeyed without another word. Together they began building a third pit, larger and cleaner than the others. Vokar followed Liam's instructions clumsily at first, crushing the clay wrong, packing it unevenly, but soon adapted. He had claws. They worked faster than the spade. When they finished, the structure looked solid, a perfect replica of Liam's design. By the time the moons of Vernar 4 broke through the mist, their light reflected off the swamp's surface like shards of glass. The new pit glowed faintly, its warmth spreading wider than before. The cadets nearby stirred, lifting their heads at the unexpected comfort. The Evixian twins whispered among themselves again, and one muttered, "He's changing the planet." But it wasn't the planet that changed. It was the way they saw it. Liam leaned back, exhaustion catching up with him, yet a quiet pride settled in his chest. He wasn't leading a group or commanding anyone. He was simply surviving, the way his ancestors did, one small idea at a time. The fire beneath the swamp was now more than warmth. It was proof that intelligence didn't always mean technology. Sometimes it meant remembering what others had forgotten. Before sleep took him, he checked the vents one last time, adjusting the moss and stones to keep the airflow stable. The sound of the slow, steady burn was almost like breathing, the earth exhaling in rhythm with his own. He closed his eyes, feeling the soft hum beneath the ground, and realized something profound. Vernar 4 wasn't trying to kill them. It was testing if they could listen. And for the first time since arriving, Liam felt like the planet was listening back. By dawn, the mists over Vernar 4 thinned into silvery veils, revealing a camp that no longer looked entirely defeated. The alien cadets stirred slowly, drawn by a strange scent that drifted through the swamp, rich, earthy, and faintly sweet. It was not the smell of burning plastic or fried circuits, but something alive, something that whispered of survival. The warmth from the buried pits spread like invisible roots through the camp's floor, melting the frost that clung to the edges of their shelters. For the first time since landing, the air felt almost gentle. Liam crouched beside his largest pit, carefully adjusting the stone vents with a thin branch. The heat beneath was steady now, pulsing softly against his palms. He had spent half the night perfecting the system, feeding it in intervals, so the energy stayed constant without suffocating the coals. Beside him sat a small pile of roots and tubers, their skin cracked open from the slow cooking. He split one with his knife, and steam rose from its flesh, golden and soft. It wasn't gourmet, but it smelled like life. He ate in silence, feeling the energy return to his limbs. His body was sore, his clothes caked with mud, and his boots half destroyed by the swamp's acid, yet none of it mattered. For the first time, the swamp didn't seem like an enemy. It was a puzzle that he had finally begun to solve. The ground breathed warmth. The water hid minerals. Even the foul air carried something useful if one learned how to listen. A rustle behind him made him turn. Vokar approached, carrying a basket made from woven reeds. The reptilian cadet's scales glistened faintly in the new light, cleaner than before. He placed the basket beside the pit and opened it, revealing strange round pods the size of fists. "I found these by the East Ridge," he said. "They smell like fruit, but feel like stone." Liam picked one up, sniffed it, then shook his head. "Too dense. Might need hours underground." Vokar nodded and crouched beside him, watching as Liam rearranged the glowing stones in the pit. The cooperation between them was quiet, wordless, but meaningful. Soon, others joined. The Evixian twins landed nearby with awkward flaps of their wet wings, their feathers clumped but drying in the warmth. One of them brought a shard of broken thermal metal from a ruined heater. "Can you use this?" she asked. Liam studied the curved panel. Lightweight, heat-conductive, almost perfect for trapping warmth. "Yes," he said. "We can make a lid." The bird-like cadet tilted her head, uncertain. "A lid?" He smiled faintly. "To keep the fire from running away." Within an hour, the small group around him grew. Curiosity had overcome pride. Even the amphibious Olorans, who had spent most of the training submerged and uninterested in surface survival, emerged from the murky water to watch. Liam divided the tasks naturally, assigning each cadet something to gather: stones, clay, moss, roots. He didn't command, he simply acted, and others followed. The swamp echoed with faint sounds of digging and movement, and for the first time since landing, the camp felt alive with purpose. When the first fire pit reached full heat, Liam demonstrated how to use it for cooking. He buried a small bundle of wrapped roots, covered the opening, and waited. Minutes stretched into an hour as the aliens fidgeted impatiently. He kept them focused, explaining the principle as best he could, how the heat didn't come from flames, but from retention, from patience. Most of them didn't fully understand, but they stayed. When he finally uncovered the bundle, steam poured out in thick waves. The smell was intoxicating. He broke the roots open and handed pieces to each cadet. Vokar was the first to taste. His forked tongue flicked, sampling the edge. His eyes widened. "It is warm," he muttered, almost to himself. The Avixian twins chirped softly in approval, and one of them smiled, a rare expression for her kind. The Aloran simply closed his eyes as he chewed, his translucent skin glowing faintly brighter from the heat inside him. For a few seconds, the entire camp was silent, united by the simple act of eating something that hadn't been cold or chemical. Liam didn't speak, he just observed. The aliens' reactions reminded him of something deeply human, that primal satisfaction of conquering hunger and cold in one gesture. He realized that none of the species around him had grown up with fire as a companion. They came from worlds of bioluminescence, geothermal vents, and artificial heat. To them, flame was a tool, not a bond. But now, with the heat pits, they were beginning to understand it, the way humans always had, as a living ally. As the day passed, the camp transformed. The cadets dug their own pits, imitating Liam's design with varying success. Some collapsed from poor structure, others smoked too much or burned out too quickly. Liam moved from one to another, advising quietly, correcting the airflow, or suggesting better materials. He didn't hoard knowledge. Teaching came naturally to him. The more he helped, the more the swamp seemed to change. The mist lifted higher, revealing the dark beauty of Vernar 4. The long green reeds bending in slow rhythm, the faint shimmer of heat rising from the ground like invisible spirits. By late afternoon, the entire camp smelled of cooking roots and moss smoke. A low hum of conversation filled the air. The aliens laughed, though none of them admitted it outright. The tension that had ruled them since landing dissolved. Even the air felt lighter. Liam sat by his pit, cleaning his tools, when the Avixian female approached again. She crouched beside him, her eyes reflecting the glow from the heat stones. "How did you learn this?" she asked. He shrugged. "I didn't. I just remembered." She tilted her head. "From your people?" He nodded. "From before we used machines for everything. My grandfather taught me how to find heat where it hides. He said the earth keeps secrets if you dig deep enough." She looked at the pit, as if seeing something sacred. "Maybe your kind was born for this planet." He smiled faintly. Maybe every planet is born for someone willing to understand it. As dusk fell, the swamp came alive with new sounds. Strange creatures called from the distance, and the water shimmered with reflections of faint lights that danced beneath the surface. Liam watched them in silence, his senses attuned to every vibration. He felt no fear now, only connection. The heat from the pits created a halo of warmth that extended beyond the camp, keeping the insects and predators at bay. It wasn't just a survival mechanism anymore, it was a defense. The cadets began to realize this too when they noticed that nothing alive dared approach their circle. The predators, accustomed to hunting through the cold and damp, avoided the dry warmth as if it were poison. The night deepened. Stars appeared through the thin patches of cloud, faint and distorted by moisture, yet visible enough to remind Liam of home. He sat with Vokar and a few others, the group sharing food and quiet conversation. The swamp hissed softly around them, but for once the sound felt distant. The warmth beneath their feet gave the illusion of safety, and in that illusion, they found rest. Before sleeping, Liam checked each pit one last time, making sure the vents were clear and the moss layers secure. He noticed how some cadets had improved upon his design, adding stone lids or air ducts. It made him smile. He liked that they weren't just copying, but adapting. That was the point. Survival was never about repetition. It was about evolution. When he returned to his tent, the ground beneath him radiated soft heat. He lay on his back, staring through the opening at the dark canopy. A small insect buzzed near his head, glowing faintly blue, and he waved it away lazily. His body was exhausted, but his mind was restless. He thought about what this experiment might mean for more than the test, for the Academy, for humanity's reputation among the stars. The aliens often saw humans as reckless improvisers, too emotional, too primitive. Yet here, on a planet that devoured technology, it was that same primitive instinct that had kept them alive. He closed his eyes and listened to the rhythm of the camp. Soft murmurs, quiet laughter, the subtle breathing of Earth through the heat pits. It sounded like a heartbeat. Somewhere deep down, the planet itself seemed to pulse in response, as if acknowledging his effort. Vernar 4 wasn't conquered, but it wasn't hostile anymore. It was aware. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, it carried him into strange dreams of old forests on Earth, of fires burning in stone circles, of faces lit by orange glow, and laughter echoing under the stars. When he woke in the middle of the night, the swamp was silent again, but his pit still glowed faintly beneath the soil. The fire had not died. It had simply gone quiet, waiting for dawn. By the time the 6th day on Vernar 4 arrived, the air felt different. Heavier, charged, as if the entire planet had taken a deep breath and was waiting to release it. The cadets sensed it too. Even the insects that usually hummed over the bogs were silent. The swamp's surface, usually restless with ripples, had turned glassy and still. Somewhere beyond the horizon, thunder rolled like a warning. Liam stood near the edge of the camp, staring into the darkening distance where clouds were gathering, dense and black, pulsing with faint violet light. The smell of ozone filled the air, sharp and metallic. He had felt storms like this before on Earth, the kind that didn't just fall from the sky, but seemed to rise from the ground as well. He called to Vokar, who was tending one of the new pits nearby. "Seal it when the rain starts," he said. The reptilian cadet looked up, frowning. "Rain does not frighten me." Liam shook his head. "This isn't rain. It's Vernar's purge." He gestured toward the low horizon, where lightning flickered inside the black clouds like veins of molten glass. The swamp trembled faintly underfoot. "When the ground shakes, you get to higher roots. If you stay low, the water will bury you." By afternoon, the sky turned a sickly green. The air grew so damp it felt like breathing through cloth. The alien cadets moved restlessly around the camp, reinforcing shelters and carrying supplies. The Avixian twins took to the air, trying to scout the storm's direction, but within minutes the wind threw them back, nearly crashing them into the mud. Liam caught one of them as she stumbled, her wings trembling. "Stay grounded," he said firmly. "This one doesn't want witnesses." She nodded and folded her wings tightly against her body, her eyes reflecting the flashes of distant lightning. He worked quickly, directing the others to dig shallow trenches around the pits to divert water and keep the heat intact. Vokar followed his orders without question now, his heavy claws perfect for carving drainage channels through the muck. Together, they built low stone walls from scavenged debris, lining them with moss and clay to hold back the flood. The Alorans reinforced the walls with fibrous roots, their webbed hands moving fast despite their exhaustion. It was an odd sight, creatures from 5 worlds covered in mud, united under the command of a single human. As the first drops fell, the world seemed to vanish into noise. The rain came not in sheets, but in columns, as if the clouds were tearing open. The sound was deafening. Within minutes, the camp was half submerged. Water cascaded over the pits, hissing as it met the trapped heat beneath the clay. Steam rose in thick clouds, mixing with the fog until the air itself turned white. Liam's skin burned where the steam touched, but he didn't stop moving. He shouted instructions over the roar of the storm, his voice barely audible. The lightning followed next. It struck the swamp in wild flashes, each one so bright it turned the night into blinding day for a heartbeat. One bolt hit a tree nearby, splitting it in half and setting its core ablaze before the rain extinguished it. The smell of burnt wood mixed with the sour scent of swamp gas. The ground trembled with each strike, and the cadets stumbled, grabbing onto roots and debris for support. Liam stayed near the largest pit, protecting it with whatever materials he could find. If the pits failed, the heat would vanish, and the cold would return with a vengeance. Vokar slipped in the mud and fell beside him, his claws scraping the edge of the pit. Liam grabbed his arm and pulled him back, just as another wave of rain poured over them. "Keep the vent open," he shouted. Vokar tried to answer, but the wind stole his words. Together, they dug the vent clear, using sticks and their bare hands, while mud filled it again faster than they could clear it. The human's muscles screamed with effort, but he kept working. He had survived worse. Deserts that cracked skin open, mountains that froze lungs solid, but nothing like this. Vernar 4 wasn't a planet. It was an organism defending itself. Hours passed, though time lost all meaning under the endless thunder. The cadets' shelters were gone, swept away by water. The only refuge left was the ground Liam had built, the network of pits and trenches. The pits glowed faintly beneath the surface, like buried hearts refusing to die. The heat radiating from them kept the camp from freezing as the storm's temperature dropped. One by one, the cadets crawled toward the warmth, guided by instinct more than reason. The Avixians huddled beneath a collapsed tarp. The Alorans wrapped themselves around the trench walls, their translucent bodies flickering in the dim light. Vokar stayed beside Liam, silent, his yellow eyes gleaming under each flash of lightning. When the worst of the wind came, it howled like a living creature. It tore branches from trees and ripped layers of soil from the ground. Liam pressed his body low, shielding the vent with his arms. The air was so saturated with moisture that each breath felt like drowning. He could barely keep his eyes open, but he refused to move. Somewhere in the chaos, a tree crashed down near the camp, sending a wave of filthy water over them. It hit him hard, knocking him onto his back. For a few seconds, he couldn't breathe. He rolled, coughing, forcing himself up through the weight of the rain. His hands burned from the heat when he touched the pit again. The coals were still alive. He almost laughed at the absurdity of it. The storm raged for hours, but eventually the intensity began to fade. The lightning grew distant, the rain softened, and the wind weakened into shivering gusts. The swamp was unrecognizable, a flooded landscape of half-buried roots and shattered trees. The air still steamed where heat met cold. Liam stood slowly, his legs trembling. His entire body ached, but the pits were intact, every single one of them. He walked among them, inspecting the damage, pressing his hand to the clay walls. Warmth pulsed through his palm. The fires had survived. Vokar approached, dripping and exhausted. "You made the ground breathe," he said quietly. Liam glanced at him, too tired to answer. The reptilian cadet continued, his voice low and reverent. "The storm wanted to drown us, but it could not drown the earth. You made it stronger than water." Liam gave a faint nod. "It wasn't me. It was the way the world works. Heat moves down. Fire hides. We just had to listen." As dawn broke, pale and colorless, the swamp began to steam again. The air smelled fresh, almost sweet. The cadets emerged from the debris, mud-covered and shivering, but alive. The Avixian female stood at the edge of the camp, her wings spread to catch the weak sunlight. She looked around the ruined landscape and then down at the faint trails of steam rising from the pits. "We thought fire was dead here," she said softly. "You buried it, and it lived." Liam didn't respond. He walked to the center of the camp and knelt beside his original pit. The surface was cracked, but underneath, he felt solid warmth, constant, patient, eternal. The fire hadn't fought the storm. It had waited beneath it. That was the lesson. Survival wasn't defiance. It was endurance. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the warmth seep into his hands. Around him, the aliens gathered silently. There were no cheers, no celebrations, only quiet respect. When the instructor's transmission finally broke through the static hours later, announcing that the extraction shuttle was inbound, no one reacted right away. The cadets stood in silence, watching the fog swirl above the steaming pits. The humans' idea had not only saved them, but changed how they saw survival itself. Vokar turned to Liam and said, "You dug holes, and from them, you built a home. That is not strategy. That is something older." Liam didn't look at him. He was staring at the horizon, where the storm had vanished, leaving the air impossibly clear. For the first time, sunlight touched the swamp, reflecting off the still pools like glass. The warmth from below and the light from above met in perfect balance. He smiled faintly. "Older, yes," he said. "Older than any academy." When the shuttle descended, its thrusters scattering mist and debris, the cadets didn't rush to it. They stood together one last time, watching the faint steam rise from the buried fires that had kept them alive. The planet was quiet now, but it wasn't defeated. Vernar 4 had tested them, and the human had answered not with defiance, but understanding. The storm had come to erase fire, but it had only buried it deeper, making it something immortal, something alive beneath the earth, waiting to be remembered. The morning after the storm felt unreal. The swamp that had once groaned and hissed with life was now silent, subdued beneath a thin curtain of mist. The air no longer pressed down with suffocating weight. Instead, it carried the clean, mineral scent of washed soil and renewal. The sky, which had never been visible before, revealed a pale sun veiled by clouds. It wasn't bright, but it was real light, and it touched everything softly, even the broken edges of the cadets' ruined camp. Liam stood near the largest heat pit, watching the thin lines of steam rising from the cracks. The fire beneath had survived. The earth still breathed warmth. The extraction shuttle hovered in the distance, its silhouette gleaming silver against the gray horizon. The instructor's voice echoed again through the comm devices. "Cadets, prepare for retrieval. Survival assessment complete." The voice sounded distant, almost mechanical. None of the cadets moved. The announcement felt meaningless now. Survival wasn't something that could be measured by time or data. It was something felt through hunger, exhaustion, and the quiet fire beneath one's hands. Vokar approached first, his steps heavy but steady. His scales had lost their metallic shine during the storm, replaced by an earthy sheen that blended with the swamp. He stopped beside Liam, his yellow eyes reflecting the dull light. "You changed this place," he said quietly. Liam didn't look at him. He crouched, scooping a handful of damp soil and letting it crumble through his fingers. "No," he answered. "It changed us." The Avixian twins came next, their feathers still tattered but dry now. One carried a small basket filled with the remaining cooked roots. She offered it to Liam silently. He took one and bit into it, savoring the faint sweetness. It tasted like the end of fear. The female Avixian spoke softly, her voice trembling with something between awe and confusion. "When we arrived, this world rejected us. You made it listen." Liam glanced at her, his tone calm. "It always listened. We were just too loud to hear it." The other cadets gathered gradually, forming a loose circle around the pits. No one spoke for several minutes. The warmth beneath their feet felt sacred now, like the pulse of the planet itself. Each of them had scars, bruises, or burns, yet none seemed to care. The Oloran, whose translucent skin shimmered faintly, crouched beside the nearest pit and placed his palm on the clay surface. His voice was soft, almost reverent. "It still lives," he said. Liam nodded. "It will live long after we leave." When the shuttle's engines roared closer, the sound broke the stillness. The cadets turned their heads, reluctant to go. The swamp no longer seemed hostile. It had become a teacher. The pilot's voice came over the comm again, impatient this time. "Final call for extraction. Any delay will terminate your evaluation." Vokar's gaze met Liam's. "Are you going?" he asked. Liam didn't answer right away. He looked around at the steaming pits, the torn shelters, and the quiet figures standing in the mist. He could feel the planet beneath him, warm and alive, like a living creature breathing slowly. "Yes," he said finally, "but I'm leaving something behind." He knelt beside his first pit, the one that had started it all, and began to dismantle the top layer carefully. He removed the stones one by one, exposing the glowing coals beneath. The heat brushed against his skin, reminding him of the first night he had almost frozen to death. He took a long breath and spoke softly, not to the others, but to the ground itself. "You don't need us to remember this. You just need time." Then he covered the pit again, sealing it completely. The warmth would stay trapped below, preserved in silence, a hidden ember waiting to be found again someday. The cadets watched in silence as he straightened and shouldered his pack. The Avixian female stepped forward, her voice steady now. "You taught us how to listen," she said, "not just to the planet, to each other." He met her gaze for a brief moment and gave a faint nod. Then it wasn't for nothing. The group began to move toward the shuttle, their reflections stretching across the shallow pools of water. The air shimmered faintly with heat from the buried fires, creating the illusion of ghostly figures following them, echoes of what had been endured. As they climbed aboard, the swamp stretched endlessly behind them, serene and unbroken. The engines stirred the mist into swirling patterns, revealing faint circles of warmth glowing beneath the mud where the pits had been built. Inside the shuttle, the cadets sat quietly, each lost in thought. The instructor stood at the front, clipboard in hand, his expression unreadable. "You lasted longer than expected," he said flatly. "Minimal casualties, sustained resources, maintained cohesion. Impressive for such conditions." He turned toward Liam. "Human ingenuity, I suppose." Liam met his gaze, his tone calm and certain. "No, just respect." The instructor frowned slightly, not understanding, but said nothing more. As the shuttle ascended, Vernar 4 unfolded beneath them, a vast expanse of silver swamps, shimmering with hidden heat. The storm had cleansed the planet, leaving it quiet and alive once more. From above, the cadets could see faint steam columns marking where the heat pits lay buried, forming a strange pattern across the landscape, like constellations etched into the earth. Vokar leaned closer to the viewport and whispered, "It's breathing." Liam nodded, his eyes fixed on the view. "Yes, it always was." The shuttle pierced through the upper atmosphere, and the planet faded into the distance, becoming just another dot among the stars. Yet something about it stayed with all of them, not as a test or a memory, but as a realization. Fire wasn't only something that burned, it was something that endured quietly beneath the surface of everything that seemed cold or hopeless. Days later, back at the academy, the debriefing room felt sterile, too bright, too clean, too far from the living pulse of Vernar 4. The cadets sat in silence as data screens displayed their performance metrics, survival rate, resource management, team coordination. Numbers and percentages flashed meaninglessly across the holographic walls. Liam barely listened. His hands still carried faint traces of clay, and his mind was filled with the scent of wet earth and smoke. When it was his turn to speak, the instructor asked, "Cadet Cross, what was your primary strategy for sustaining warmth under incompatible atmospheric conditions?" Liam considered the question. He could have explained the science, convection control, heat retention, combustion efficiency, but he chose different words. "We stopped fighting the planet," he said. "Once we did, it stopped fighting us." The instructor paused, confused by the simplicity of the answer. He made a note on his pad but didn't press further. The others glanced at Liam, each remembering the night of the storm, the buried fires, the silence after survival. For them, those memories didn't need words. Weeks passed, and the academy moved on. New cadets arrived, new trials began, and Vernar 4 became another line in the training schedule. But among the instructors, whispers spread of that particular survival group, the one where no one froze, where a human taught others to dig into the earth instead of running from it. The story grew quietly, passed between lectures and corridors, until it became legend. Some cadets later claimed that when the next group landed on Vernar 4, the ground was already warm. For Liam, the experience marked something deeper. He returned to his quarters one night, unable to sleep. He stood by the viewport, staring at the stars. Somewhere among them, Vernar 4 circled its pale sun, breathing quietly beneath the clouds. He imagined the buried pits still glowing faintly, the heat moving slowly through the ground, feeding the soil and the life around it. He wondered if one day, when others returned, they would feel that same warmth and think it was the planet's own doing. He hoped they would. He closed his eyes and pressed his hand against the cold glass. The academy lights hummed behind him, sterile and artificial, but he could still feel the pulse of that living fire somewhere far below. It was the same rhythm that had carried him through hunger, through the storm, through doubt. It was the rhythm of endurance, quiet, patient, unstoppable. The next morning, he received his evaluation report. Outstanding adaptability, demonstrated leadership through unconventional methods. Subject's approach relied on instinctive environmental harmony rather than technological dependence. Recommendation: future instructor consideration. He read the words once, then folded the report and placed it in his locker. The paper didn't matter. What mattered was what couldn't be written. The knowledge that even in a world that devoured fire, warmth could be found if one was willing to dig deep enough. And so, long after the mission ended, long after the data was archived, the story of Vernar 4 remained, not in the Academy records, but in quiet retellings among cadets across galaxies. They spoke of the human who buried fire beneath the swamp and taught others that survival was not about conquering nature, but becoming part of it. Some called it legend, others called it luck, but for those who had been there, it was truth. Because on a world that devoured fire, one man had found a way to make it live forever, deep beneath the earth where warmth could never die.